So I think this discussion can go on forever because this is also, as he rightly pointed out, this is also a nationalist, developmentalist, ideological position, and but there's also something which is beyond. One problem with Green Revolution, as was pointed out, is that its advocates have been economists, and economists are simple-minded people. They only think of growth. And this growth is in terms of productivity in numbers. And now there is plenty of science available, which is actually talking, what is our problem now? India still has very serious food crisis, extremely serious food crisis, almost as serious as it was in 1950s. And that is the crisis of nutrition. So what does Green Revolution do? It gives you a chapati which has no zinc in it. I was talking to a scientist the other day, the person who is scientist he's an agriculture scientist working in Punjab Agriculture University, Ludhiana. Now he's retired. He was saying that the new crops, see, for example, even wheat size of the plant is much smaller. Basmati plant is much taller. Wheat also, they bring small size. The what is it called? The jar that goes inside is much smaller. So it doesn't pick up nutrition from the earth. And now there are people who are experimenting with different kind of kheti. If you plow the earth 5 feet down, product is going to be very different, right? So the point is not simply about going traditional way or going Green Revolution way. The point is about going the scientific way. This was not a scientific way. This was a simple solution which was not experimented, on which there was not much study, and not that the data was not available. Since it was economic-centric, nationalist position of increasing productivity, we forgot about nutrition. That's why all these other crops, Punjab used to have something like 25 or 29 crops, and it was reduced to 7 or 8 crops, right? So that monocropping is not something that became a problem in 2021. It has been a problem for a long time, right? So nutrition is as critical as food is. What does it do? Yes, we get full, but then you have diabetes, you have many other problems, right? If one is talking about health, you needed different kind of scientific technology other than economists, and this technology was available and it was ignored. So it's not like India did not need to increase its productivity, as Richa Kumar of IIT Delhi has shown. India's productivity had already started going up with decolonization, right? Once the colonial rule left, you had various other possibilities which were available. What India needed to do was to think scientifically and produce more, and it was possible. Green Revolution is not implemented in Bihar even today. Bihar's land is much better than land of Punjab. These are Gangetic plains. Even now, if you go, anything you throw, it will grow up. I've seen Bihar land. If you go towards, was doing field work in Madhubani, you cross Yamuna, this Ganga, and the quality of land that you have. Until today, there is no infrastructural investment in Bihar. 1 year you have drought, the other year you have floods, and this is a land with abundance of rains, abundance of rivers, abundance of water. Why was there no investment in Bihar? Because Bihar landlords did not want Green Revolution to come there, because that would have... So there is a political logic. I think that is something which we must keep in mind. And that political logic was also the logic of developmental state, which, again, corporate capital is not something that comes to India in 1990s. 1950s, American state is heavily invested in making Green Revolution successful in India because they are scared of Soviet Union gaining influence, because food is something which was very, very critical. So you rush food in without really thinking about it, without bringing local people. There were 8 or 9 major universities set up. All of them were headed by American economists. And one of them, actually, Charan Singh is the one who fought with him and threw him away. He says, we don't want these white men coming and telling us what kind of food we should produce. So Americans came here and they took over agricultural research. And these were American economists. They were not concerned about local culture, local food habits, local requirements, local body shape. Now all the doctors will say our body shape also decides what kind of food we require. Everyone can't eat similar kind of food. Even in India, you can't eat similar kind of food. quality of food required in climatic conditions, the kind of body shape we have. Men and women require different kinds of nutrition at different times. These were cultural wisdoms available. These are scientific. I don't believe in traditionalism. That's a very problematic thing. So I think there is this economist-led scientific revolution which also needed a lot more scientific input which was missing. And now we have that available. And I think that's something which is now being talked about. About instrumentality versus spontaneity, I don't think any movement is possible if it was only instrumentality and organization. The idea of movement is, movements, I kind of have been fond of writing this sentence which I had written in one paper, that movements are not just moments of being, they are also moments of becoming, right? And it is this becoming that produces a new kind of energy. And that energy comes from all kinds of sources, and if the leadership knows about it, they could mobilize it anytime. Yeah. Leadership obviously doesn't know about it, and that's what is the beauty of movement. Movement kind of produces a new kind of energy, new kind of language, new kind of politics, new kind of hope, new kind of violence, new kind of possibilities, and that's why a movement is called movement. It's not, we have in sociological literature this from what is mobilization to institutionalization. The moment you have parties becoming or organizations becoming solid, movement disappear, right? Then they are individuals who see their interests. There are individuals who have their own egos. And that's what has happened to farmers' movement now. The moment you have individual leaders leading those parties, then their egos, their party lines, all those things become very critical, and the movement disappears. So I think that is, in some sense. And the third point that was about spectacle. I think spectacle is also a class issue. Don't underestimate the volume of money that was spent on running this movement. Just one day, giving drinking water to people who were sitting there, just drinking water. Just look at the costs of it. They will have the volume of cost that was being spent. Who was giving this money? That's because Sikh diaspora was sponsoring it. Punjabi organizations, Haryana farmers were very, very prosperous. They had surplus vegetables and they could afford that. Likewise, Western UP. So this is also agriculturally very prosperous region. Jharkhand tribals can't afford. They just don't have resources. And I think that class aspect, not simply internal to Punjab agriculture, but also regionally, it becomes very, very critical. And I think there's a very important political point whose voice acquires spectacle status is not simply a question of strategy. It's also a question of strength. And I think, so finally, I'll just kind of wind up in next 5 minutes. The point, things that I was thinking, what will I say? I've read both the books, and I perhaps one of the few persons who read both of them before they were finally printed. So I had received kind of copies of these books before they went to they had already been kind of processed by the publisher, but before they were published. So I think Sudhir's book carries my endorsement. His book also was supposed to carry, but then the publisher said that now time is up, and I was kind of a little slower. Anyway, I think if one was to think of, what did this movement do? It taught us quite a lot. Us, I mean, people who are living in Delhi or JNU or middle class in diaspora or in India. And there are things that it taught the farmers, right? It's not like they didn't learn anything. And then obviously there are challenges. If one was to think of these three things, what did it teach me? And I think it taught me a lot. I mean, I've not written a book, but I've written several newspaper articles, and one paper came out in Journal of Peasant Studies, 2 papers in edited volumes. So I have kind of, thought about it, and I've written about it. And I think if I was to think of myself, it did 3 different things, and I think these are very, very critical. One was what I would call as, I've been working on agriculture for a long time, and this is something that I discussed last time also. My PhD was on debt dependencies, and I've been thinking about agriculture ever since. And one thought of agriculture purely through class logic, through in kind of structure of relations among debtors and creditors, laborers and farmers. And that was the classical, Marxist formulation, and that was the framework within which agrarian question was discussed. And I think farmers' movement taught us that there is more to agriculture than class. class is definitely there, not that we can forget class. It also told us about what things that we are talking about now, ontological value of agriculture. Agriculture is food. Food is life. Life is land. That's why farmers could not be defeated, right? That's why farmers said that, no, it's not a question of democracy. They had faith in themselves because they are producing food. They're connected to land. You tell them you're anti-national and they'll smile and laugh. How can we be international? National means motherland. Motherland is mitti and we are the ones who are closest to mitti. How can anyone tell us we are anti-national? Farmers could not be anti-national. And I think that is the strength which farmers' movement in some sense was able to mobilize and project, and that gave them a different kind of faith in themselves. And I think second point is related to ontology, is to thinking beyond instrumentality. I mean, I've seen, left organizations mobilize farmers and laborers, but they can't go very far. It was only when left farmers, left unions also became, in a sense, culturalized, that the Sikhi became such a critical idiom even for those who were staunch communists. And they also owned up to Sikhi. And I remember, leaders from political parties who have nothing to do, who would have never been to a Gurudwara, they were standing, behind the leaders who were reciting Ardas or talking about Sarbat da Pala. That's where I think hope for everyone comes, right? So these are very kind of grounded in a particular religious tradition, not just Sikh tradition, right? And this religious tradition is not religion in the sense in which Virinder and I are wearing turban. This is a different kind of cultural kind of resource that farmers were able to bring in. And I think this is where politics was articulated very differently, right? The question of hone, that became so central to the farmers. We are willing to die for it. Why would anyone die for high price? Why would anyone die for a Qanun, right? They were willing to die for it because they saw it as their being, their very idea of themselves. And finally, it also kind of relates to what we call as, the larger epistemology. And we have always thought of agriculture, thought of us, thought of, in the classroom, the way we teach, everything comes from the West. Something happened in the West in the 19th century, post-Enlightenment Europe, and there were theories produced. And we think that it is only through those theories that we can talk about social movements. In those theories, we can talk about class struggle. It is only those theories we can talk about political process. But they just didn't bother about that. And I think that's where, for me, that was a very, very important learning experience. And in some sense, it was a moment of decolonizing our mind. And they decolonized it through action. And that's what perhaps, brings it to the center stage. What did he teach them? And I think that's what I was saying. It was also a moment of becoming. And we've been working on Punjab. I've been also interacting with other people. The kind of questions that what Virinder was saying could not be raised earlier. Now farmers are talking about them. Green revolution has become a real question, whether it is good for us or bad for us. They are now considering, even the so-called big farmers are willing to talk on this question. They're willing to talk about the value of, they know that, our future is limited because groundwater is disappearing and water is something that they're really worried about. There were floods in Punjab and some of those floods were there because of the way ecology has changed. We think that floods have nothing to do with agriculture. It has something to do with green revolution. What green revolution does is, with the kind of fertilizers they use, it makes the soil hard. And the soil can't absorb water. And when it can't absorb water, take water inside, two things happen. One, obviously there are immediate floods. Second, there's no recharging happening. Why is there no recharging of water? Normally it should recharge itself because there's so much rain, so much water coming. Where does this water go? It's because the soil has become so hard because of all these chemicals which are put on agriculture because of these fertilizers and particularly the fertilizers. So there are certain kind of chemicals. Fertilizers are chemicals which are already there in earth and soil, and certain kind of chemicals go up, and that not just pesticides, fertilizers also, because if you add a particular chemical in it, it becomes much harder, right? So it's only the first 2 inches where the plant is grown. It's not made. So there are real problems which are happening because of green revolution, and this is something that they are being told by scientists now. So it's not like they're anti-science. They realize that green revolution has actually potential of damaging agriculture. Likewise, gender, I think, is a very difficult question for Punjabi farmers to deal with. But caste is something that they're willing to talk about, right? They are willing to discuss, and they realize it, right? That if we have to survive, we need a different kind of sociality in the rural. And they are talking about it. They are reworking their relationships with Dalits. Not that they are going to give them land, not that Dalits are going to get land, but at the same time, there is what my friend James Manner call as a new kind of mode of accommodation, right? Where they're willing to sit with Dalits on the same court, across the table, and they're willing to talk to them. So they're also recognizing the technological challenges, as I was telling earlier. So there is new science required. They're not anti-technology, but technology can also be leveraged for better agriculture, sustainable agriculture. Sustainability is not something that comes only by going back to tradition or going back to past. That is not possible. That doesn't make sense at all, right? Because those kinds of agricultural practices also would require certain kind of relational structures. Nobody is going to go back to Jajmani relations. That's not possible, right? So you need a new kind of social framework within which agriculture can be done, and this social framework needs to be sustainable. A large proportion of our population is going to be dependent on agriculture, and farmers, as I use the word cosmopolitan Kisan, these are cosmopolitan Kisan. They realize that when we are doing agriculture in a village of Haryana or village of Madhya Pradesh, they are connected to what is happening in the world. That's why what the announcements that came last night, farmers are very worried, right? If there is a deal with US, we don't really know what kind of material is going to come from there, the dairy products or agrarian products, because we don't really know what the deal is, right? So farmers are constantly worried about these things. They're constantly thinking about possibilities also of export market. What can they export? What can they kind of produce which will have market in the global market? So finally, when it comes to challenges, if you look at this movement, it hasn't really achieved much for the farmers. It hasn't achieved much for the agrarian economy. If one was to call it as an agrarian question, to think that farmers' movement of 2021 has solved the crisis of agriculture, not at all. The crisis of agriculture is where it was. It might have become worse. It hasn't become much better. Yes, there is talk about it. There are 2 new books that have come up. Governments are worried that you can't ignore farmers' lobby, and as he was saying that world over, farmers have kind of seen Indian farmers protest, and it has inspired them. And you see tractor emerging as a new symbol of farmers' protest, trolley emerging as a new symbol of farmers' protest, and that is the way out. I mean, there's no other way other than asserting your agency, and farmers have been able to, in some sense, mobilize that agency. Thank you so much.